recording. We're live. Once again, this is the Solvable Mysteries Podcast, episode 37. We have found time, I guess, to do two episodes this week. So, that's always fun when we can do that. And also, we're going to be, going for a little bit more different case than our usual thematic of unsolved murder crimes and such. By the way, our last episode I felt like was really fun to do, so we're definitely going to be going back to those cases. But for now, we are covering the Tunguska event. So I'm joined by Glenn. So hi, man. How are you? How are you doing?
Hey, doing okay. Having a fun weekend, and I'm really excited to talk about this topic. I feel like sometimes some of these things we talk about are really fun because you get to go down memory lane and revisit something that maybe was really interesting when you were a kid and you had a lot of time to think about weird things. And this definitely was a weird thing, so I'm real happy to talk about this.
Right, no doubt. I mean, the footage that we're showing right now on our YouTube, it's not the actual event. It's just a similar event from 2013. So I don't know, man, if you don't mind giving us a quick breakdown of what the actual Tunguska event was, then we could start rolling from there,
Yeah. So I'll even rewind a little further. So I remember, probably for a lot of us, when you're a little kid and you start kind of getting a better idea of the world you're living in, kind of beyond your house and beyond your neighborhood, your city, your country, and you start finding out about the ancient past, and you find out about things like the dinosaurs, and the dinosaurs are pretty interesting stuff, right? You got these big crazy dragons running around the earth,
pretty much, yeah,
stomping around. Yeah, I mean, just giant animals. I mean, animals that are bigger than almost anything you see now, stomping around the earth. And at some point, I think as you get a little older, you get to the question everybody gets to with dinosaurs, which is, well, what happened to the dinosaurs? What changed? And then I think it's even more amazing when you realize how long ago that was. Like, essentially, the earth has all new plants and animals since then. And it turns out, as you start to find the answer of what happened to the dinosaurs, that what happened to them has actually happened on the Earth a couple of times, or I would say more than a couple times, maybe 7 or 8 times now. So what they think happened to the dinosaurs was that probably, and there's a couple different eras of things that look like dinosaurs. So what's crazy is you know what I mean? You had kind of these big mass extinctions of things a couple of times where the Earth hits reset. So yes. What happened? What they think happened, or one of the things they think that happened, is that a pretty massive meteor came and hit the Earth. And when something like a meteor hits the Earth, it doesn't just make a hole where it hit. It ends up making a huge impact. So this is one of those things that sometimes it's a little hard to wrap your head around when you're a little kid, but as you get older, and just think of this, like when you have a fish tank, like a big fish tank. If you take a big fish tank, if you dropped a big rock in it, well, okay, that would suck. That would knock around a bunch of water, might hurt some fish, but the water's kind of getting chucked back and forth. Well, what if you drop the rock in at the speed of sound? Okay, that would be worse.
Yeah, that would be pretty bad, right?
There'd be some shock waves, right? And that I think would be pretty awful. And then just think, what if it wasn't just the rock? What if it was a big dirty rock? So the rock goes, and what if there's let's say there's a bunch of dirt at the bottom of that fish tank, and that rock hits the bottom of the fish tank, and all the dirt goes up. Let's say the fish tank's bulletproof, so it doesn't break the fish tank. But meanwhile, with all the shock waves going back and forth, and all the dirt, those fish, whatever fish are left, they don't see sun for 10 years, right?
Jeez.
And can you imagine? So all the plants and all the plankton and things like that, this whole system, this whole ecological machine that is the Earth, all the living things that depend on, you have a whole bunch of living things on the Earth that depend on sunlight because they turn sunlight using chlorophyll. They turn sunlight into energy, and then the other animals are what eats those plants and plankton and fungi, etc., and then turn that into energy and eat each other. Well, like that all breaks down and things go extinct, and then essentially the Earth had to start over. So the reason why I'm talking about that is sometimes we don't really appreciate, and it's partly it's because there's not a lot of what we can do about it right now, but the fact is these things happen every so often, every X amount of years. Like the odds are there's just so many things floating out there in space. If you look at the moon, it's a good example. So we're at least protected. The Earth has a big cushion of air around it. We have an atmosphere, and that atmosphere is a shield, because when something fast, it's kind of weird because you don't really think about it. When you wave your hands around in the air, you don't really feel it that much. You feel a little bit of resistance. But when you have something coming in at several times the speed of sound, air has a real effect. It starts to make things get very hot, and it slows things down,
right. And
it protects us. So every day there's just all these little rocks and pieces of ice and things from space that hit the Earth's atmosphere, and almost none of them hit the surface because they just get really hot. They hit the atmosphere, they get hotter and hotter and hotter, and then they burn up. And meanwhile, if you look at the moon is like what would happen to us if we didn't have the atmosphere.
So so the moon doesn't have the atmosphere, right? Like, I know I'm completely like a newbie when it comes to like these types of things, but like okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, so it's like with the moon, nothing's stopping it. A rock right. hits the surface of the moon with pretty much the full speed plus gravity, right? So plus the moon sucking it in with the gravity. Yeah, so things. So if we ever build like a space station or a lunar station, let's call it, on the moon, we got to figure out something about these meteors, because that's going to be a real concern. That's what happens. So
why did I never heard about this? Like, this is crazy.
That's why the moon looks like a big pimply face, because it's just
right.
crater, just covered in craters. So that's a reality.
You know what?
For us,
that actually is messed up when you think about it, because like imagine if Earth didn't have like the atmosphere. I'm sure like we could not live and so on, but let's just assume that we could live, but there just was no atmosphere, and we would be getting hit like the moon is getting hit. Like, I'm pretty sure like there would not be any humanity,
Yeah, because I mean, when it hits, like I said, it has a big effect. Like people worry about pollution. Well, imagine the pollution that happens. I mean, we saw it when even like really big volcanoes go off. So like there's been some volcanoes that have gone off like in the Philippines and in Iceland and places like that, and it'll change the weather. Just a volcano. And I think one of the big worries, just as a side note, maybe that's right. Another good show, is the big worry is that Yellowstone National Park, which is a really great national park here in the United States. It's got all these great geysers and natural springs. I went when I was a little kid, and
right.
I've just been aching to get back. It's just such a great place to visit. But the fact is, underneath it is a huge supervolcano, and if that supervolcano actually went off and exploded,
right.
it would end the world. It would, because just from like the way it would blot out the sun with all the stuff that gets ejected into the atmosphere.
Wait, so this is Yellowstone, right?
Yeah, it's gorgeous.
Wait, it's in those colors actually?
Yeah, it's crazy. It's super hot water like that. The weird bacteria and stuff that grow in it, and like what? Yeah, it's amazing. I can't even. It really is my favorite vacation ever. And I've been to a couple places, on this earth.
I've never like. I don't know why we don't get like these American like cool landscape places hyped up here, but like I've heard about Yellowstone, but I didn't really like knew that it was like so cool.
Yeah, it's got all this weird stuff going on because of all the geothermal activity under the crust, and unfortunately that's a double-edged sword, because someday it may boomerang on humanity if it all goes if it all blows up somehow. So I guess that's
Is this like
part of it.
Is this like where the is this like where the old reliable is, or what?
Old Faithful, yeah, Old
For
Faithful.
real? This is where it is?
Oh yeah, all this cool stuff. It's got geysers and natural springs and like mud pots, they call them, where it's just like, mud bubbling, and it's just miles and miles of cool stuff like that. And it's got wildlife, like it's got buffalo and grizzly bears and all this stuff.
Right.
Yeah,
that's so cool.
It's an amazing state, or amazing location.
Wait,
So
where is it at? It's in.
it's like Montana / Wyoming. I want to say it's like both a little bit of both states, I think. Kind of straddles the state line, I think. But it's the thing is it's only not snowy.
It's exactly. It's in Montana, it's in Wyoming, and it's a little bit in Idaho as well.
Yeah, it's probably got a similar longitude. I think it's longitude I'm thinking of. Similar longitude to like where you are in Lithuania. That kind of weather, maybe colder. As a matter of fact, the geography. Just like a side note, like I said, we'll probably have to cover it someday. The geography of Yellowstone is particularly interesting because it's like a big lifted like bowl that turns into snow, and the buffalo have to like basically shuffle through like feet of snow.
Right.
Yeah, it's like crazy. Right. So anyway, I mean, it's a good side topic, but yeah. So the reason why I'm talking about this is as you kind of learn about things, like as you're a kid and you learn about this meteor that wiped out the dinosaurs, and the question starts coming up, like you start to ask yourself as you learn about your own mortality, you're like, well, why doesn't this happen to us? Like do meteors ever almost hit the Earth? And like I said, they hit the Earth every day. There's even been little tiny ones. Like there've been people that have actually had like little tiny meteors like hit them in their chest in their house, where like it lost without killing them. It fell through the Earth. It lost a lot of its speed. Then it went through the roof, and the roof broke a lot of the fall. And then it like went poof, hit them in their chest, and they're like, look at this. And by the way, if that ever happens, keep the rock, because that rock is worth more than its weight in gold. They're extremely valuable. Yeah. Anything, any kind of mineral from outer space that you can prove is what it is, and give it to some kind of scientific authority. It's such a rare thing, and it's way more rare than gold or some other mineral. Right. Just for scientific purposes.
Wait, so quickly, like we have to like I just want to know, like, those like rocks, I guess the meteors or whatever, space rocks, do they like contain substances that are not found in our planet?
Potentially. I mean, that's one of the things they think about is probably the way you're going to see space exploration really take off is space mining. So someday, when they can figure out how to have robots build themselves, you're going to see a set of robots put into space. They're going to start mining their own materials to build more robots. But then once that gets going, there's plenty of gold and valuable minerals like that in space that are just waiting to be collected. Exactly. So that's the next kind of industry.
Just a quick note. We have a map of all the meteorites, I guess. So you can definitely say that they do happen a lot, and these are just the ones that hit the surface, not counting like the ones that hit like the water. So like
right. And
USA is like I don't know why, but like USA is super messed up. Like seems that you've been getting hit like all over the place. But yeah.
Maybe it's just that there's somebody that even noticed, because I bet you a lot of the big blank spots, it's just there's nobody to even count it.
Probably somewhere like in Africa, there's probably so many, like undiscovered craters, probably,
Yeah, just or like yesterday we were covering the outback. I mean, just think of how many places in the outback nobody even knows except for the dingoes.
Exactly.
Right. That anything but there
would make sense, because like countries like Japan, where like there's like so many people living in the same spot, like look at this, like probably every single one has been discovered by now. And look at Siberia, you're meaning to tell me that just Siberia got like really like passed up on, like getting hit by meteorites. I think only the really big ones get like really researched into.
Interestingly, Antarctica is actually one of the places that's the easiest to find them, because pretty much if you see a rock on the ice, it's like the only place that rock could have come from is the sky.
Right.
You know what I mean? There's no, there's nobody walking around there dropping rocks. So if you see something, that's what it is. So, okay, so, you start to ask yourself, like, well, do these things ever hit us? And just per that video we showed earlier,
they do, right? Yeah.
Yeah, things happen. But then they always worry, like, well, what about a really big rock, or how big does a rock need to be? Does a meteor need to be a problem? So, well, let's talk about this. What happened was, we do actually have a fairly recent event. By recent, I mean, within the period of, like, let's say, modern communications and media. And I'm giving a lot of latitude with that, but
right,
I think
just about, right, just about.
Yeah, where we had, like, let's say,
communication,
photographs, maybe radio eventually, or some form of that, or telegraph or telephone, and then eventually
the beginning
pictures.
Of the industrialization age, you could pretty much call it, right?
Yeah, that's a perfect way to put it. So, what it was is, I think we were lucky. Once again, this is a good example of when something happens someplace where there aren't a lot of people. So, this turned out to be a good thing for everybody. So, there was a place in Siberia called Tunguska. I hope I'm pronouncing that right.
It's either, it's probably either Tunguska or Tunguska. Me, being, like, pretty close to Russia and knowing how, like, they pronounce things, I would go with Tunguska. Like, they would probably say not Tunguska but Tungushka with, like, shka. It's probably Tungushka, something like that.
We'll have to see it in the Cyrillic. Maybe that would give a better indication.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I'm betting you're right though. It's got to be you've got a lot better feel for it. Right. So. This happened a long time ago, and it's weird because it happened in a place that not a lot of people saw, and the people who saw it weren't super connected to the rest of the world. So even once they saw something, just getting the word out took a long time. But there was what seems like must have been a massive explosion. By massive, I mean something like the size of some of the bigger nuclear explosions that the U.S. or the Soviet Union set off in, like, their special tests. Like, we're talking about an explosion the size of, like, a hydrogen bomb.
Right. From what I've researched, it was even more than that. Like, but I could be wrong. Like, it's probably even more than, like, a hydrogen bomb can produce or something like that.
Yeah, it's right. So, like, one of the biggest explosions that was man-made, I think the biggest one was what was called the Tsar Bomba, which the Soviet Union did, which I think was, somewhere like the 60 megaton range, 90 megaton range, something like that. It was so big that it kind of scared everybody, even scared them. They're like, I don't think we're ever going to do that again. I was like, a little worried we're going to break
the Soviet Union is, like, funny like that. They did all sorts of crazy experiments. Have you heard about the one where they were, like, trying to see how far into the ground they could dig? For no apparent reason, just to see.
Just like a content. I mean, it's great when you have the resources of an entire set of countries.
So, like, superpower.
Yeah.
It's like if a kid ran a half of the world and was like, let's do some funny experiments.
Let's just pour all kinds of money into this. Maybe it'll pay off. So I mean, like this thing, they think. The estimates are pretty wide because they're not totally sure exactly even what happened, but they think there was an explosion that was somewhere between 10 to 30 megatons, and by megatons we mean megatons of TNT. So, for comparison, this is way bigger than like the explosions, the actual nuclear weapons that have been used in war, which there's only two of them ever, and that was in Japan, in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Those were in kilotons, so those were in the low kilotons, I think less than 10 kilotons each, and those killed just hundreds of thousands of people. So this is way bigger than that, and they think it was an airburst. So what I mean by an airburst is, this is interesting. It's a little bit counterintuitive. A lot of times, like when the kind of everybody, for the longest period in warfare, just out of necessity, when you were shooting like a cannon or explosive or dropping a bomb, you dropped the bomb hit the thing, the bomb exploded, and that was about as good as it got. And at some point, because of science and physics being applied to this, they realized that, oh wait, if you blow off an explosive, if you do what's called an airburst, if you blow something up above your target, it actually keeps the ground, like the ground actually muffles the explosion when you blow something up in the ground. So if you drop like a big bomb on like in a bunch of dirt, well, half that explosion is being absorbed by the dirt.
Oh, so it's better to explode it before it actually reaches the ground, right?
Yeah, exploded. So actually, that was like in World War II. We started. We had something called vertical timing shells. So like even in artillery, it's amazing when I even when I think about it now, I'm amazed that they had this technology in World War II. That they would spend.
Come on, like I have no idea how they had it, you know?
I mean the U.S. actually had what were called variable timing fuses that had little tiny radar. I don't even know how they afforded this. Little tiny radar fuses. Yeah, that could actually, like, they would use a little bits of radar to tell when they were like 50 feet above the ground. So like when you have troops in a trench, right? You have troops in a trench in like foxholes,
right?
And the foxhole protects you pretty well. Like unless a shell falls in the foxhole, you're not going to get hurt,
like,
right?
You're pretty much good in there,
yeah. I mean, you might get a little blown up by the shockwave, but whatever. But oh no, so like that, you know, in our kind of human ingenuity to kill each other, we're like, oh no, if you blow up a shell above the foxholes, you can spray down metal and all kinds of stuff down on people. So
man, we're really good at figuring ways how to kill each other, you know? Like that's like a good thing about humans. Like we can actually come up with really good ways, like how to kill, you know, other people. So that's like really fun, you know, just a good trait.
Check out, and even on that same note, there's this one kind of bomb that I think both we and Russia have, is one that actually, it has a parachute behind it that slows it down right when it gets near the ground, and it releases gas.
What?
And like,
holy moly!
You know, I think we all know a gas explosion. Even like gasoline turns to vapors very quickly. So like sometimes people find out the hard way. They put gasoline in a bucket.
Oh yeah.
The gasoline turns into a vapor and then ignites somewhere, and it's an explosion like a bomb. It's not just fire. It's like when you mix fuel and air. It's called a fuel air bomb. Anyway, that whole concept of exploding something above a target, it's like a huge spear of just pure power, and the power exudes in all directions, but especially downwards, right? So the reason why I'm giving this explanation is what happened was there was this big explosion, and all these villagers. This is a really sparsely populated area, so Siberia. I mean, anybody that's ever, I mean, especially those of us that lived through the Cold War, had heard about Siberia as being the place that Soviet Union sent people who were naughty. So Soviet Union.
I mean, naughty as in being like really smart and writing books and so on. So
yeah,
scientists,
exactly.
Stuff
basically,
like that.
Basically, people, people, political enemies, enemies of the state, etc. People that they didn't like. Siberia was the middle of nowhere, lost in the forest and snow place that they would send you to just die. You know, work. You know, in some work camp.
It wasn't like necessarily as now when I'm like, you know, because like you probably guys in America, you probably don't even hear those like stories like all the time. It's probably some like an afterthought for you guys, but that whole Siberia, people
the
being
logs,
right, that stuff like is being like constantly talked about here in the media, you know, because like people from Lithuania were taken there, you know,
right.
So you probably don't like hear it that much, so you probably have like more of a, I'd say, a realistic understanding of what actually went down, you know, that it wasn't like super crazy. I feel like the notion that I was giving it was a little bit more exaggerated. It's not like everyone who went there just died there, you know, they sort of, you know, they just went to work there, but it wasn't, from what I've gathered, it wasn't like a North Korean type of a situation where like it was like super crazy. It was like really messed up, but it wasn't like North Korean type messed up, you know?
Okay, it wasn't. Yeah, as I understand it, there was maybe like a spectrum, like so, like maybe there were some some places that were probably pretty close to being a concentration camp where they sent you there to
Oh
die.
yeah, I'm sure.
And
I'm
then
sure
and then
there were
some of it,
some. Yeah, yeah. You're completely right.
yeah,
Yeah.
and some of it was. I mean, actually, interestingly, as I understand it, Stalin. So Chechnya, post independence, Chechnya became kind of a problem for Russia during the kind of the 90s as they kind of sought their own independence around kind of religious identity. And the interesting thing was apparently they had done that during Stalin's era, and he got so mad at them he deported all of the Chechens to Siberia. So the only
Right.
reason why the
Right.
only
Right.
reason
Right.
why the
That was
Chechens even
crazy.
I mean that was where he sent his quote unquote problems. So the only reason why they were even back to start trying to get independence again in the 90s was they came back from Siberia then. So that
Exactly.
was pretty fascinating. So it's really is like literally the middle of nowhere. It's very like it's tough terrain. I mean, if you're out there, you're some kind of pioneer cowboy. I mean,
Right.
you are a tough human being. And there's, I think, like also like some kind of uh, basically Aboriginal people. I mean, we would call them like almost like
It's like
like
Yakuts. At least that's what we call them. Like it's like the man. I'm gonna find something.
kind of like
It's like
Asiatic, like native peoples,
it's
right?
like
Kind of.
the American natives, but
Yeah,
they're
yeah.
like more. They do like stuff in the snow more, as opposed to
Kind of
like
like
your
Inuit or something.
yeah, as opposed to like the American natives who like have these whole traditions with like horses and stuff. I don't think like the people in Siberia have the horses, in their traditions as much as they do in America, but they have like snow stuff, like because they're always in the
Like
snow.
reindeer and stuff like that.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So definitely like people that are used to living on like the tundra and these really
Right, it's these
like
people, right? So they also
yeah,
look a little bit more like Asian than the people
right,
that, the Native Americans in America, because
right.
obviously, they're pretty much in Asia. So what do you expect them
Right.
to look like, But yeah,
Right, right, right.
yeah,
It's true, right? And they think that it's probably the kind of maybe the same lineage of people that crossed the Siberian land bridge eventually
right.
to
So
come to the Americas about 11,000 years ago or so.
so there's probably some
Uh,
connection.
yeah, some genetic connection. So it was in the middle of nowhere, and we do have descriptions from people. I mean, the descriptions are pretty scary. You have
Oh
people
yeah,
that said that basically, they were there, kind of living their normal day in their little village or hunting or whatever they were doing, and all of a sudden there's just this like massive bluish light, and then just it's kind of weird because like sometimes I'll give you an example. Universal Studios here in Los Angeles, they do a lot of like stunt shows where they'll do like little tiny explosions, like explosions that are done with like natural gas, but they're like safe explosions. They're like the
right,
kind of explosions in like a stunt show that you can do around a bunch of tourists and do that like every 2 hours or something. And even when that goes off, being like 50 yards away or so, just that you can feel the heat just from the light. There's just the light. You're not actually close enough to feel the heat from it. Maybe there's a little bit of heat, but just the light from something like that can give you heat. And
mm,
I was at an air show in October
right,
where they set off the biggest explosion I'd ever seen in person in my life. This explosion was well over 100 yards long,
right,
at the air show, and I remember, and we were like, we were a good 400 yards away at least. And even I remember just me and my kid and my wife just being kind of blown away by like the heat from the light. So
right,
it was
right.
like that kind of thing where it was like, okay, sorry. Yeah, so it's just it's interesting because these people are describing like a really intense light. I mean, one of the people said that the light was so bright and the burning sensation from this thing that happened was so bright that like he was just about to rip his clothes off
Oh wow.
when like you know what I mean. Like
That's
like he thought he was
yeah,
gonna
but
burst
like
in
I've
fire.
read I've read like that same like eyewitness account. It was crazy, and he got like smashed into like I don't know, man, like thrown back like 2 meters or something like that, which is fucking insane, man. When you think about it.
Yeah, that there was like then that's what happened. All of a sudden, there's like a shock wave and winds
Right.
and hot winds, and it sounds like what happened to people that were like at ground zero for Hiroshima. Like when they were getting, and that was a much smaller explosion, and this was something that it looks like it happened. It must have happened way farther away. Now they do think that maybe 2 or 3 people died. They don't know their names, but they figure there's a probably good chance there were some people running around in the area hunting or fishing or whatever.
I'm sure that someone had to like die, I'm pretty sure that at least a few people died.
Yeah, so that but I guess in retrospect when we look at it, it's like, well, thank goodness it didn't happen like at Paris or someplace like that, because that would have just totally demolished the city.
The comparison I've seen was to Frankfurt. So if this Tunguska event did not happen in Tunguska, but it was like a Frankfurt event, then there would not be a Frankfurt right now.
Right.
Yeah.
So yeah, exactly. So that it would just totally demolished it. So the evidence we have for that is, what happened was, there was this explosion. A bunch of kind of the locals said, there was something happened. Blast waves were detected in Germany, Denmark, Croatia, the UK,
Washington.
Even as far, Washington D.C.
Right.
It said that the shock wave was about a 5.0 in the Richter scale, which is pretty big. And they said the night skies in Asia and Europe were aglow. I'm not really sure what that's from. Is that particles that are making it, or if it's just actual some kind of combustion in the atmosphere?
I feel like, you know what, I've actually read into that whole situation. I think it's like the fucking snow, like the ice. Like the ice that stayed in the sky or whatever, because when this thing was disintegrating, when it was heading into the Earth's atmosphere and stuff like that, it left a whole bunch of ice in the sky.
Okay.
And the ice sort of made the sky turn into some sort of a bluish color, something like that, because they actually managed to replicate this with the United States did with the shuttle launches. So the sky stays the same, but obviously it obviously disappears a lot sooner, because the shuttle launch is nothing compared to the Tunguska event. So
and actually that might be a good indicator of also what it was that actually blew up. So
right.
That was the other thing was it took a long time for the world to even figure out what happened, because there's something happened, and something happens over in a place where you don't even necessarily even have telegraph lines or anything at the time.
Look at this. I have the railroad map of the Trans-Siberian railroads, and the Tunguska event happened somewhere where I'm pointing right now, somewhere around this area. So it's not like you can even get there that easily, So it's like the 2000 and what it's happened in the 1908, right? I'm pretty sure Russia at 1908 had other issues,
Yeah,
right.
I can barely even imagine there was that much of any infrastructure over there, and so and just to that point, they weren't even able to get anyone to kind of what they think is ground zero of this explosion for a really long time. So it actually took
10 years, I believe.
Yeah. These Russian scientists and explorers would go out there and they're like, wow, look at all these trees that are knocked down.
Right.
Look at this doesn't seem normal. Maybe we should go investigate this. And
right.
It took a long time for anybody to kind of take them seriously. And obviously, like you said, there's the Tsar at the time had a lot more to think about than knock down trees, right? So
right, no one cared, man. People were trying to survive. There was harsh winters, not that much food, all of this other craziness going down in Europe. It's nah, man.
Right, who needs it? So
right.
So yeah, it took a lot of effort, and then even once they get there, a lot of the once again they're hampered by logistics, because it's where do you even start? like if you, especially in those days with the limited tools, I mean, you can take photographs, you can try to take soil samples, but then like even back then we barely had an understanding of a realistic understanding of even how things worked in that. I mean, we had some basic understanding of physics and the celestial bodies, but we had a really limited understanding of even like how much stuff was hitting our atmosphere. We didn't have radar yet, so I think it was hampered by a lot, and I feel like a lot of the development in terms of theories have just come probably in the past 2 decades. So probably the second half of last century, and probably also once things started getting a little more
scientific, just in general, like because there's
modeling
not,
and
right. There's just a limited amount of things you could do in like 1908, or like even up to like the computer age. Like what can you actually do? Like in terms of actual research, it's definitely hard. I mean, if Russians had like a Nikola Tesla on their hands, maybe he would have came up with something, but like they probably didn't have a guy like that, so
And then everybody's working on other projects too, right? It's not the top priority. There's
right, like
all those other things,
like the starvation of Ukraine.
Right.
They're like
right.
bigger projects in place, so
yeah. And there's and there's a couple wars in between there, and
there's some little ones,
aerospace technology to work on and other things. So
sending
I think it's one of those
dogs into space, and like stuff like that.
Which is interesting, because I think probably some of the ability for us to even wrap our heads around the extent of the impact came from that. So us being able to actually just get up high enough, between overflights and satellite pictures and things like that, that's when we can kind of get a better sense of what happened. So I mean, I think what right now what the big debate has been is, well, what exactly was the thing composed of? And
right, this is the big question, right?
like what kind of like strange,
because they didn't find any, because from after the explosion, correct me if I'm wrong, but they are yet to find any like meteorite thing,
pieces,
right, any substance from a meteorite. So it definitely makes me question the whole meteorite theory as a whole, because like, first of all, trees still don't grow in this area, so this is like a big question, because like all the other craters, like trees are growing there, so there is no crater, trees don't grow there, there is no evidence of a meteor substance, right, so
yeah, and it is interesting, because it's like, I mean, in a way it's good that we don't have like a crater, because if we did have a crater, we may have also had those other effects I mentioned, of just all kinds of debris getting spewed into the air and blocking the sunlight out, and it would have changed a lot of things. I mean, for probably a lot of things would and wouldn't have happened if that had happened. It probably would have drastically affected world population in a way that nothing else could. So, one of the things. So there's a couple of theories. So theory one was, well, this meteor came and just got so hot, and it was just the right combination of like just timing, that it happened to just totally self-immolate and explode, and then maybe someone would look at that spot right there, for instance, the picture, maybe they'll say, well, that's where a concentration of like salts or something, because if you drop a bunch of salt like on a lawn,
right,
you're not gonna, it's not gonna grow back, and maybe if there was a lot of salt, maybe it wouldn't grow back for.
But have they found any salt? That's the thing. Like, did they find any?
Yeah, I mean, so they've done the soil samples they find are kind of weird, and that's where, once again, it's like the science keeps changing on it, like how we interpret. Even now things are being, like, conclusions about how we read soil samples, and like what means what. So, like, for instance, the whole theory, a lot of the theories around the big meteors that killed the dinosaurs are based on these like certain deposits that you find all over the world that look like kind of like a meteor hit and burned up everything on the surface,
I see.
and spread it everywhere, right? Just spread the debris everywhere, and that's where that theory came from. So, yeah, they have some strange little, like, they're noticing, like, for instance, these little what they call pothole bogs that look like they might be were little pieces of, like, if the asteroid blew up like an artillery shell and turned into all these little tiny rocks that just went really deep into the earth, and it is like a kind of a wet, moist part of the earth. So it's not like that big crater in Mexico where maybe that was a drier, or well, it was like water / land. It was a different kind of composition. They're like, well, that could explain some of it, but then, like you said, it's still like you'd think you'd find some actual rocks, you'd find some real minerals, and like, given how valuable that stuff can be, there's like a pretty good incentive to go find it. So, okay, that's theory one. Theory two is, well, besides rocks in space, there's also comets, and what comets are like big rocks of ice that are just it's just water that's frozen in ice in space. And
so it's not like a physical, like, body of like it's not like a rock. It's just pretty much like water frozen over, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like big ice rocks, basically, right? So just big rocks of ice, and it's not just one big, like, a lot of comets are really like, they're clouds, and I don't mean clouds like evaporated water. I mean clouds and like a bunch of things together, right? So that can be a cloud. A cloud can be a description of just a gathering of a massive amount of different things together. So, for instance, when I think they sent it was the Japanese, I can't remember, that sent a satellite the past year or so to go land inside a comet.
I think it was
take some pictures.
I think it was the Japanese, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
Right.
So it's pretty cool, because it's like, oh, like check that out. So yeah, you can go see it, and it's like, so the theory is one of these comets, and there is a comet that kind of coincides with the timing, where they thought, well, maybe a piece of this comet got sucked in by our gravity, and this happens. Like, for instance, some years ago, there was a big comet that, because of like satellite technology and telescope technology, we were able to get pictures of this big comet that hit Jupiter, and it was pretty cool, because Jupiter's pretty massive, and we got a chance to see, like, what would happen if something hit a big gas planet like Jupiter. And that was, I mean, obviously, like if the same thing had hit us, it would have wrecked us, but because it was Jupiter, where nothing's living as far as we know, it was a good opportunity to just check out a little physical experiment. So the idea is, well, you have a comet's made out of ice, when ice turns into water, and maybe whatever was mixed, comets aren't just pure water, like they have dirt and other crap mixed in there.
Of course.
Maybe it was just a perfect combination of steam rapidly heating up to the point where it just exploded, like in a kind of firecracker style, or like a teapot that didn't have any it wasn't letting off the steam fast enough. Like, if you had a teapot that was getting heated up extremely quickly, like way hotter than a stove, and it's not letting out the steam fast enough, at some point that thing's just going to explode like a bomb, right? Yeah.
So that's one of the theories, right?
Yeah, so that's one of the theories. So that one of the things that kind of aligns with that is, like, even though there's not a crater, there's like a lake that, and there's a lot of debate about this lake. There's a lake that they're like, well, it seems kind of conveniently placed right where the big portion of this explosion was. It's potentially like, that would make sense. Like that's what's left over. Like there's a big impact from like just the force of it, or even if some ice landed, and then the ice, the ice turns into water, and you have a lake, and maybe that,
yeah. Are we talking about? Nah, this is probably not it. Yeah. Well, I assume there's a lake somewhere, but I can't really find it here.
Lake, I have the name of it, and the lake is called Lake Cheko.
Okay.
Cheko. It's like a small bowl-shaped lake, and
Oh,
you know,
yeah.
it's only about 8 kilometers northwest of like where they think the center of this explosion was. So that
Oh, yeah,
matches
yeah,
up pretty
look at
well.
this. It's pretty close. Like, this is like the explosion
Yeah.
site. This is the lake, you know?
So and it's like the lake bed is conical shaped, which seems to align with like, you know, maybe if a piece of ice or something, or even just a
Right.
focus. So you know, it could have been that not all like some part of it split into the ground, and that's why you have all these little weird bogs that are
Right.
like from the little pieces of it, and then this was like a big piece. And they say magnetic readings indicate a possible meter-sized chunk of rock below the lake's deepest point that may be like a fragment of either a meteor or like some kind of rocks that were inside the comet.
I mean, it
So
would make
that
sense that this is not like a natural lake formation, right? It definitely looks like it's a little bit out of place. Like it has been like almost, artificially put in place. You could almost say, like
right.
just the outlines are like a little bit like, it seems like it's, it shouldn't be here. So that's interesting.
So that's another theory. And you know, there's like a lot of debate, of course, back and forth about this. And I mean, the main thing is the impact area of the explosion is at least consistent with the airburst theory of whatever it was. So
Right.
we have a couple more theories that are like more the fringe theories we're going to talk about. But the main thing is they've done other military tests where they've kind of like with models or exploding like smaller, not nuclear sized weapons, but other things over like areas
Right.
of land. And it always, for whatever reason, it seems counterintuitive, but for whatever reason, it causes this kind of butterfly-shaped blast area. And that's just, I guess, one of those things about the physics of explosions in the air.
Right.
So that being said, now there's two other theories. So one of them I threw in here myself. I don't even see it listed in the Wikipedia, but I'll do it last.
All right.
So the second to last one is what they call a geophysical hypothesis, and this is a little more science fiction-y, but still pretty interesting. And it's called, I guess it's similar to something called the Verne shot hypothesis. But the hypothesis is that there was some kind of like buildup of just like the Yellowstone thing we were talking about in a way, some kind of buildup of gas underneath there, and almost like a gas leak in a house, or a gas leak like
Right.
around an oil well or something, like a oil well fire, that like this gas had built up under the surface and suddenly vented upwards, but had not been exploded. It was just like this upwards column of
Right,
natural.
like a gas flowing from the ground, like into the.
Yeah.
I don't even know how to explain that. Like gas moving towards the sky, essentially.
Yeah, and that it was just the densities in the air and the chemical properties caused it to, maybe the temperature differences, maybe it was warm, that it would be something like just a massive amount of gas that somehow leached into the air
Right.
above the area, and then something like maybe a lightning strike or something had ignited, some kind of spark in the atmosphere had set it off, just like we talked about a giant fuel air bomb. Like if you took if you just had like a swimming pool full of gasoline
Right.
that you suddenly uncovered to the atmosphere, and then an hour later something sets it off, that'd be a pretty big explosion. I'm a little bit mixed on that. I have to ask, like, well,
Right.
for that to be true, you would think that there would be petroleum deposits or other things that would kind of, volcanic activity, something that would indicate that in the area. And it's not clear to me that the people with this hypothesis have like can point to anything like that. Like natural gas doesn't just happen. Like it usually is linked to other deposits, as I understand it. So
Right.
that's why, what I mean. I'm not totally clear. It's a cool idea.
It's a
I
cool
mean,
idea, definitely, right?
Yeah.
But it's,
Yeah.
I mean, if that was the case, it probably would be something that has never happened before, So it's not like
Yeah.
we could actually have, an explanation that we could just like base all of our theories without any like questions or anything like that. But well, I actually found some more interesting theories on what actually happened, so we could just like quickly run through them. So first one is like a cometary airburst. So I feel like this is what actually happened. I'm not sure why they're calling it the crazy one. Wait, wasn't it like what actually happened?
Yeah.
So okay, but these guys are like, this is probably just a crazy theory to you, but this is probably what happened. So right,
Yeah.
another one is like the collision with a miniature black hole, a piece of antimatter. So I'm not sure anyone even knows how that would go down, but it's just an interesting thing to think about. Maybe there was like a black hole and it just sort of exploded into like Siberia or something.
Yeah, I kind of like. I mean, I don't know if I'll go for the theories because, of course, the meteor stuff, just by the odds, right, of something that's happening all the time.
It's like insanely small,
seems,
right?
Yeah,
like
it
in terms of a
like,
black hole, right?
But I mean, it's not. But there's like there's not a zero chance of it, right? If we're in a, and I think that's one of the things that
right.
it is important to say because it isn't just fringe. So a lot of times, even the people that specialize in this kind of science around statistics and physics, and they do like to point out that what they call like a black swan event. So black swan, the long story short, black swan event is something that's very rare. But something that's very rare doesn't mean that it never happens. And actually,
a black swan event.
Yeah, it's kind of a long story where the term comes from, but basically it's saying that, like I guess I think it's something like people for a long time people didn't think there were black swans.
Oh,
and then,
I see.
But then when you do find a black swan, all of a sudden it's like, well, there is actually such thing as a black swan, which means it's not impossible. And a lot of times a black swan event might be like what's happening right now with the virus, where it's like, well, this is something that.
Well, I mean, we had like viruses before, So.
Oh yeah, it's true, right? Yeah. We should have been more prepared, but yeah, I mean, something that doesn't happen as often though, and so like once again, it is kind of interesting because it gets into this very interesting stuff where we don't know a lot about it. Even stuff like antimatter. Antimatter is a good one to bring up too, where antimatter is like this kind of like the opposite of our matter, and a very tiny amount of it could be immensely powerful. And I think this is always like the interesting part for us with our show is there are things like, for instance, that Nimitz UFO event,
right?
That are like, well, there are things that seem to fall outside of what we have good explanations for. So I think that was one of the things that was always interesting about this topic to me, and what gets into kind of my next version of that theory is, when something happens and you don't have necessarily a good explanation or a good way to tie down like what happened, it is pretty there is like this kind of big open-ended mystery because you don't see, like in the rest of the world, like the only other thing that I can think of that looks like all those trees knocked down is here over in Washington State we had something called Mount St Helens, which was a volcano that blew up. So this mountain, basically the whole top of it blew off. This happened in the 80s,
right? And
it flattened trees for I went to go see it when I was like 17. I went to go see the area. We couldn't get that close to it, but I mean, it's still messed up. Like there's still just everything's knocked down. Yeah. Like it has that, just like you said, like why isn't stuff grown back?
I don't know, man, but like when you Google it, you get this crap.
Mount St. Helens?
You get this crap when you Google it, so
that's weird.
It's like it's like an Ellen game show. Okay, so she completely took over that Google search, right?
That's so funny. Yeah, Mount St. Helens, it was like just this really, and it was once again, it was one of those things that just we were lucky it happened. There you go. That was like the only thing I can think of that was even close.
This place exists in reality?
Yeah, and it's not even. It's just if you go to Washington State over here, up here in the Pacific Northwest, you can go and there's just all these trees knocked over. It actually killed a few people.
Holy
It was one of
crap.
those things where they thought it was just going to blow up like a normal volcano, and basically the whole top third of the mountain blew up, and it just caused like a similar kind of effect, but like not even nearly as big though, I think, as the Tunguska thing. So that's where it's pretty interesting. So here's the one that I always thought was kind of cool
Right.
when I used to read about this in like in kind of my preteen days, reading UFO books and things like that, and paranormal stuff, was that, well, what if it was like a spaceship or some other kind of space vehicle, von Neumann probe, whatever,
Right.
that had come into the atmosphere, was crashing, and like you mentioned, had some kind of drive that was powered by like a black hole drive, antimatter drive, something capable of
better than a diesel, right? Something a little bit more.
Way better than diesel. Something that you could go into hyperspace with.
Right.
And the thing has like a meltdown, like submarines and nuclear reactors have meltdowns, and they have problems. Like, it's not impossible for some kind of energy drive to have a problem. So the theory was, this thing was coming into our atmosphere,
right,
and redlining, and all of a sudden just boom, and explodes with a level of force commensurate with some kind of super amazing technology. And that's why there's no pieces of rocks. That's why there's no asteroids.
I mean,
that's why there's
none
of that stuff. Yeah.
I mean, that could make sense. I mean, who knows, man? But at the same time, if it exploded, wouldn't there be like spaceship particles all over the place, or at least some indications, right? Don't you think?
Yeah, I mean, that would be the argument, is like where is all the metal pieces and things like that. So
right.
Yeah.
Right. Or maybe it wasn't running on metal, man. Who knows?
Yeah. So it's just one of those like fun to think of theories,
right. We're not like saying that it was aliens or anything like that, but wait. So
it would make a cool like comic book or movie or.
So it's like it's one of the like theories, the UFOs, right? And then also we have intervention of Agda, god of thunder. So this is where it's like really wacky, I would say. I mean, gods, I mean, maybe it was some sort of a thunder god, who knows, so no one really knows what happened, right?
Can you imagine to the native peoples that were in the area that like they don't really necessarily have any formal education, or like none of this other stuff's on their horizon. They didn't. I'm pretty sure most people, especially back then, in 1908 in Siberia, in these native villages, I'm sure they weren't getting any kind of schooling. I can only imagine what that must have seemed.
Hell no.
Imagine.
Right.
Yeah, I mean you would have to think it was supernatural.
Right. I mean, definitely. I mean, these people that were living there, they didn't even know what country they were a part of. So it's like they didn't know that this was Russia. This was like a tribe to them. This is our tribe. Like over that mountain, there's like a whole nother tribe. They don't know that this is like whole Russia. They don't know any of this stuff. So when that stuff happens, they're like, what the hell is going down in here? So I mean, it was probably crazy. So I don't know, man, if we're going to like be wrapping it up or not. Just like a few ending notes. I mean, so what theory are you going with? Because like personally, I really don't have an opinion as of right now, because I would be going with like the comet that sort of like exploded before hitting the ground. But then again, why are there no trees growing there? I mean, the salt could explain it, but I don't know, man. I feel like if something like that could explain it, then it would have been explained by now. The other thing is like there's no impact crater. Well, obviously if it exploded before reaching ground level, so there would not be any. But that's also something to think about. And yeah, man, I don't know. I think it could have been that gas situation, that like gas was flowing from the ground into like towards like the sky upwards and in an upwards direction, and then it sort of ignited, and this whole huge like gas explosion might have happened, because there's like a lot of gas in Siberia, like it's like the main Russian export. So it could have been something related with like gas, just a gas explosion from the ground, So, I mean, who knows?
For me, what was interesting was we didn't go into it too much because, like I said, I mean, I know it's not necessarily fun listening versus reading. People can do it on their own, but the accounts from the actual eyewitnesses,
right?
It sounds a lot like, I know it kind of reminds me of those movies like Independence Day or something, where like the huge flying saucers are coming into the atmosphere, and it's like just not saying it's flying saucer, but like that visual of like something massive coming into the atmosphere, where it's just this big column, cloudy, like, it looks like something big coming in from space. Right. That was the description they gave it, basically. Right. Like a big column, like a line, a big smoky, steamy thing coming into the atmosphere, and then whoosh. Just now that you've mentioned explosion. Now that you've mentioned it, like the eyewitness accounts, they all sort of stated that they saw like something, they like quote unquote, they said that it was like a cylinder or a pipe, bluish cylinder or like a bluish pipe, so. It if we're going by like eyewitness accounts, it definitely seemed that it was something coming out of the sky as opposed to coming like from underneath the ground. So right, I guess it's more logical, but then again, it's not completely 100% proven, at least to me. Like I think there's a lot more questions to be made. I mean, some interesting notes. The guy that I'm not gonna, I forgot his name, but the initial scientist, like the mineralogist from Russia, that actually was the first guy to even locate the Tunguska event area 10 years after it actually happened. Like he located that area, he went there a few times, but then even 10 years after he discovered it, somewhere around there. So initially, like 20 years after the event had happened, he had actually ordered a plane to fly over there and take a picture, right? So I don't know, man, he took like a few pictures. He got those pictures from a plane that flew over the Tunguska event. However, some KGB guy from Russia actually destroyed all of those documents, I believe back in the 70s, so we can't actually have those pictures, we can't see those pictures from like, I don't know, like the 1930s, which maybe they could have been completely different, maybe they would have given us some answers, but, the KGB were like, this is not important, just destroy this. So what a waste. Yeah, see, once again, it was like all, it's one of those, it was the whole topic was just way too much about science and not enough about national defense or other things that tied into that, or whatever other agenda people had. So that's the unfortunate thing. I think it must be very frustrating for scientists.
I mean,
that happens.
Right, the meteor, like the mineralogist that actually went there, he actually had to like come up with schemes how to explain this thing to the government just so he could get funding.
Right.
So it wasn't like go and investigate immediately. It was like this guy had to like ask the government for money just so he could get there, so I guess just shows like what Russia was back then, what kind of a country it was. It was a big mess, to say the least.
It's sad. Well, maybe someday this will be a big tourist site like Mount St Helens is, if they can ever get the infrastructure to be a little more forgiving. Maybe when we have flying cars, it'll be a lot more, a lot easier to go visit that, because right now it's just
impossible. It's just like even in the Google like maps, there's no pictures. and there are
people
no
go
pictures.
to see everything, right? Like people go to see like Chernobyl, but they don't,
Right, right.
So,
But no one actually goes to see like the Siberia is really crazy like that. You just have like forests that are like the size of like the United States. So you have like a forest that size. You're not gonna like go literally into the middle of that forest. So it's
right. Yeah, it's amazing. Well, I think in this show we've I know we've talked about a lot of cool things. I think we probably maybe we've at least helped the state of Montana and Wyoming with their tourism.
Let's hope.
For Yellowstone.
I mean,
and
not in these
same
times,
for,
but
Washington. Yeah, maybe after post virus. Same thing for Washington State with Mount St Helens.
It's amazing.
Yeah, unfortunately, when I went, the mountain was behind a cloud, but I at least got to see some taste of the kind of destruction that Tunguska had,
right.
And it's striking. I mean, it's like you drive through it. There's all these just trees just knocked down everywhere, and it's like, wow, you've never seen anything like it.
Right. I guess we're wrapping it up, right? So, guys, catch us on episode number 38, right? 38, because this is episode 37. We did back-to-back episodes this week. So, for 38, not really sure. We're probably gonna go back to covering some more, cases that we were used to covering, probably for 38. So we'll decide on that. And as always, stay safe, protect your families, especially during these times, and catch us on the next episode. Peace out.